The first reading contains a whole program of life. It's a whole mode, actually, of existing, very different from the common run of things. The art of taking in. Years ago, in France at the time, I remember having to communicate a problem in the monastery to actually a higher superior. It was the fact that all three superiors in the house were deaf, and it caused problems of communication. I put it this way in a letter. I cited the example of my brother, who at the time worked for the BBC, and how he would perhaps make a program, and if I should listen to his program, there would be communication of soul between his soul, his mind, and mine, coming through the airwaves. But it was a communication in one direction. I could not speak to him. Then I went on in the letter. Should it happen that I should have to speak to my brother for some problem on the telephone, then it would be very different. There was an input and an output on the machine, and there was free flow in both directions. And I compared the situation to one in which, if the superiors have only the possibility of output, because in practice that's what happens. If you notice, a deaf person, bit by bit, gets out of the habit of listening and just talks. Then there's a problem. And going back to the other example, the telephone, I tried to explain by letter how important and very important and desperately important at times was the possibility of two-way communication and in depth, because listening is an art, and one needs to know also what is not being said explicitly, the art of listening to the soul of the heart. Now, this concerns each one of you here as you go through life. Look at your next conversation. Do you go to it as a beggar, as an empty vessel, wanting a crumb, wanting a bit more knowledge, truth, light? Or do you first listen to the beginning of the person's phrase and say, oh, he's going on to that point, so this is the answer to that point, and then come back to the presumed answer needed, probably having missed the point altogether and not grown in knowledge? Look at many a committee meeting, how much true listening goes on. So I would propose this to you in this period of leading up to Pentecost. Be in that spirit of waiting which the apostles were told about. Stay in Jerusalem until you are clothed with power from on high. The old word is tarry. Tarry. Wait for. It's a mode of existence which applies to God and to man, because that same waiting for God also comes into our prayer. Because something of that output can also be in our prayer. Prayer is not, certainly not merely, the recreation of someone else's prayer, so vocal prayer. In its depth, there is a simplification and a gaze at a gaze, eyeball to eyeball, waiting again for a crumb, a word, a light, a truth I did not know. happens when the Spirit finds us waiting. Just the other day, I was in prayer in the Hermitage, and I felt a nudge to take up what a little child had asked me to do. It meant going a long way in the car to see him and the family. But then something unexpected happened. I heard that they wanted me to go and visit a person who was dying, whom I knew actually, a young person. But this was the bit that took me aback. When communicating that bit to me, this other bit also was communicated. A common friend of ours, who's into prayer big time, was picking this up in prayer. This lady who's dying, there's an issue there, and she was picking up this. She could see babies, actually 2 babies. And she was asking what this meant in prayer, and it came to her, there are miscarriages, and it has upset her. So, when I got to the lady in hospital, after a while, I asked her, did you have any miscarriages? She was taken aback, and I said, 2? Yes. How did you know? Somebody in our circle picked it up. And we were able then to sort out that bit of her life which had always troubled her. The point of this little anecdote is this. What was happening there? There was a lot of listening going on, a lot of tarrying, a lot of passiveness, of emptiness and, yes, availability. This applies equally to each conversation that you and I will have today. The person before me is a world of his own, has his truth, his history, and might know something I don't know. Watch the person who knows it all. He's got an answer to everything. At the end of the conversation, however, he's come out with the same volume of knowledge as he has when he went in. You go into your next conversation and start by this position. It's a secret. When the mouth is in this position, it's ready to launch. It's already half launched, and the mind is already working overtime, thinking about the response. And so we're blocking out new truth, preparing our response. Learn the trick of this position. And in conversation, know that you're more likely to say something powerful, well-aimed, pointed, and of lasting effect if it hits the right bullseye. Otherwise, you're throwing off into the air. The Gospel talks about the coming of the Paraclete and the leading of the Church into all truth. Many people come to me upset, confusion in the air. I will just calm you with the wisdom of the centuries, all of you, because it concerns you all. A few months ago, I was in the International Clergy Retreat in Fatima, and it's very orthodox, very faithful, very reverent, and very, very good speakers from all over the world, with doctorates. Usually they're exorcists as well, and they're big into prayer. And we get the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. And one lecture we had was given by somebody who has quite an important position in the Vatican, a German. And he calmly gave us to understand this, referring explicitly to the question of admission to Holy Communion of certain people. There has been no change. And he repeated, there has been no change. And he insisted that he was repeating in the church's doctrine. And he explained that it cannot be. Why? The church is one with its history and with the Spirit who guides it, who is not multiplex but simplex. And therefore, if a document or documents appear to be puzzling, the only possible interpretation is that of the voice of the church in continuity with itself. So don't listen to commentaries, go to the source itself, quietly in the presence of God, read between the lines and see whether actually it can be seen to be the doctrine of the centuries. Don't listen to high-powered and noisy speech in this matter. God is a God of serenity and is not afraid of truth, and so we calmly listen. There is one bottom line, it's this. There is an attitude which perhaps the Spirit of God wants us to adjust. It's this. It's that same awareness of the mystery of a soul, which has to be handled in that spirit of gentleness and awareness of that mystery which God alone fully penetrates. And therefore one starts with that and then one tries to apply. Do you see the difference? It's a calm, loving way of trying on the battlefield of this war that we're in against Satan to rescue morsels of immortal soul with love and not repulsion.
Each has his tale. I have heard many meanings in the air, but meanings of my own bade them not be. They oft were o'er my ears, yet moving there, high syllables of sense sent unto me, but bid not enter in. Then there lay a noise of answering that high did ring, e'en while each new word came, and kept at bay was aught that unto sound was found to cling. And thus it is that, knowing all before new knowledge might have come, I now know all I ever knew, and know today no more than yesterday, when yesterday did call for but an hour to be but heard, for knowledge knew not all that missed a word.